So if you go in, and I'm just going to share my whole screen. Let me know if you can see it okay. I go to me, which is my account, and I choose settings. You choose your pronoun now by going to just did this. Where's the edit? Edit settings. So when you go to edit settings, you can change it right here. You're golden. Oh man, you don't even understand. Like, my little one, Lucas, we call him Ellie, or them. They're awesome. They're like my little David Bowie. So both my kids have ADHD, and my oldest has mild Tourette's. But my youngest, they're 9, and man, they're just a world beater. And they got their school to add bathrooms that are non-binary or gender neutral bathrooms. It's just been very, very cool and a growth experience for me. So that being said, welcome guys. Thank you for being here and being. I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute. Being part of the class. These lectures are going to be recorded, and if you ever can't make it, please feel free to stop by and catch up on the recordings. My name is Michael. I go by Mr. G, or my full name is Michael Galvincia, but my last name's kind of treacherous, so I'm not really a stickler about that. Welcome to History of Animation. So I know Blair and CL, you guys have both taken. I'll find some. By the way, I see your chat. I'll find some cool pictures and I'll share them with you guys of Ellie, just so you can check them. They are so spectacular. But long story short, this class is the history of animation. So I don't know in what context you may know me from, if you do know me already, but I've worked for Flashpoint or Columbia College of Hollywood in some way, shape, or form for the last 5 years. At one point, I was the department chair for the visual communications and graphic design and digital art programs. Now I just teach online. I have a day job. I'm actually building out online colleges for universities. I'm an LMS administrator now for my day job and an artist. But I teach because I love teaching and I can't ever step away from it. So this class is kind of a companion piece to another class I've gotten to teach, which was the history of visual effects. But this is the history of animation. And for me, I grew up, so I'm old, I'm 46, and I grew up in an era where my dad was an artist, and he very much steeped me in the idea of anything could go for, entertainment. So for example, and the reason we don't have readings or screenings or anything for this first week is, that's a compliment and a half, Blair, is that I just want to start with a blank canvas this week and then paint on that canvas the history of what we're going to go over and the history of animation. So animation, and you'll notice in the discussion boards, we kind of touched on it a little bit, even in the topics that we're tossing in there. I want you to think about the role animation plays in your life as we go through this class. So for me, I have always been obsessed with all things animated, comic book, when it became video games, and now circling back, I find myself just fascinated with, so like I'm a Star Wars freak, the animated Star Wars for me, that's the bee's knees. Like everyone loves Mandalorian. I have this relationship with animated storytelling, and I think it comes from my love of comics and just the idea of sequential artwork and the craft, and it's a passion of mine. So I teach history of VFX. I also teach some motion graphics classes, and then I teach web stuff too, because I Swiss Army knife of sorts. But that being said, these classes, these history classes, they're fun because you're not going to be stressed to learn a new tool, which is a nice little relief. You can focus on your portfolio and learning your art and all that stuff in your other classes. In this class, we're going to really focus on discussing the idea of why we love animation, and if you don't love animation, what there is to love about animation. And then on the second part of it is where did a worldview come in? I was lucky enough to get asked to teach this class online and develop it from scratch. And as I was kind of thinking through it over the last few months, I really was thinking about how, for me, I grew up with a very US-centric view of animation. And if it had not been for my dad's love of the Beatles, I probably wouldn't have gotten into some things like, the Yellow Submarine or some European artwork. But for the most part, anything I was ever introduced to was from a very USA or American-centric or Western view of things. And I traveled through life, not even exaggerating, probably a solid 26 years, where that was, to me, how it went. That was what I knew. That was what I was comfortable with. And I really thought myself a cultured human. So I was into all these art films, and I'm reading books and listening to music and getting into all these things. And I won't even lie. When I was in college in the 90s, I loved that era of Disney. So Lion King and Aladdin were my jam, no matter how much of a punk rock kid I was. And I was just one jump over that was me all day. So I fell in love with the idea of these movies, right? And then I graduated undergrad and I moved to Chicago, and I started going to the School of the Art Institute. And all of a sudden, my worldview was blown open, because no longer was I only focusing on the things that I could easily find access to, but I was shown European animation, Asian animation, Arabic animation, things that were so out of my worldview. But then when I saw them, I was like, oh, this speaks to me. So then I started thinking about, what if I could teach a history of animation class, but sprinkle in all of the different things that were going in all over the world as we go through the history of from A to B, how we ended up to where we are now, right? So I just watched Soul, one of the most amazing movies I've ever seen. Pixar never lets me down. So we're going to talk about how we went from cave paintings to Soul. Basically, that's my goal for this class. But we're not going to do it in one night. We're going to do it in 11 weeks. So tonight, I just kind of wanted to set the stage for the class, do a really quick rundown of the timeline we're going to cover and kind of what to expect. And then also just go over some best practices in terms of what is going to be best for you in order to kind of be successful in this class. Sound good? Awesome. I'm super excited. This is going to be a very fun class. I was so bummed yesterday that our internet went out, so I couldn't record my first lecture. I had to push it back till tomorrow. So you guys are my guinea pigs. But this class is just going to be so fun. So that being said, here's what to expect. And I'm one that does not like surprises, and I don't like surprising my students. This class is going to be a lot about learning, a lot about discussing and exchanging ideas and thoughts. So the discussion boards are going to be a huge part of it. So you have to be active in those discussions each week. And I'm going to try to be as active as I can possibly be and respond and be in there too. And we can mix it up. The more active the discussions are, always the more we're going to get out of them. This class does not have a lot of busy work. It doesn't have quizzes or tests or anything like that. It has a research paper component and a presentation of that research paper. The topic of that can be anything you want. So as we're starting off, and I have to flesh out some of the assignments in the assignment breakdown still just a little bit more for you. I'm finalizing them right now. But as you think about it, if there's an animator we talk about and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to dig into this human. They are mind-blowing and I want to see what goes on with them. Or as we're talking about a film and you're like, don't know what that was, so let me write my research paper about it. It's going to be a 2 to 3 page paper, nothing too hardcore. I'm going to help you. You're going to be turning in drafts. We're going to be crafting it and making it the best we can. And then when we're done with that, you take that and you present it. Triple spaced. No, just kidding. 32-point font. It's going to be double spaced. It's going to be using college standard, and I'll give you guys guidelines for it and all that. That's what I had to finalize up. I couldn't remember if we were using MLA or AP style, so I just have to tweak that stuff up for citations and whatever. And your title page does not count as a page. Oh, sorry, but that's the idea behind it. So that being said, tonight I want to just kind of set the stage for you. So each week we'll have 2 discussion boards. You should respond to them and you should post responses. That's really part of how you get marked as being part of class or marked as attendance. For week 1, it's checking off that, hey, I read the policies and I did what was asked to do. You get credit for being here. For the rest of it, no. You can... there's a bunch of different ways you can do it, Cecily. So let's say, if you want to present it yourself, you can. If you want to kind of create a pre-recorded thing, you can. If you're a graphic design student and you want to make, like, say, a experimental way of presenting it, you can. The research paper is the academic. The presentation is the artsy-fartsy part, if that makes sense. So you have a bunch of options for how you present it, and then we'll look at them all week 11. Cool. All right, so let me share up my screen, and I got some slides to go over with you. I hate PowerPoint and big blue button because I can't. There we go. I can't see you and present at the same time. And I also want to make this bigger and me smaller. So can you see me okay? Can you share this? Can you see the screen, I should say? All right. So when I switch this to presentation mode, if you can't see it, let me know, because it gets crazy in a hurry. All right. So tonight I wanted to go over kind of a brief history of animation, and I know what I'm going to do. I'll turn me off. You get all of it. Perfect. So you can see the screen okay? Everything is showing up all right for you when I go into presentation mode? Perfect. Thank you. Hold 1 second. Had a mouse issue. Now we will move on. All right. So this is kind of what a lot of people think of as animation now. But animation has come from a history of literally everything we see kind of is animation. So it's a rapid display of a sequence of images to create the illusion of movement. So like when we see things on TV or in movies, We're literally seeing, so in movies, we're seeing 24 frames per second, and they move at a rapid rate, and it looks like it's moving. On TV, it's 30 frames per second, and these still images move at that rate, and it looks like it's moving. So really, whenever we see something in motion, when it's uh, represented motion, so dash presented motion, it is basically an illusion. So each frame is a photograph, a drawing, computer generated image, and each frame differs just slightly before it, and then that gives it the illusion of movement. And like I said, this is where it started. So the moment a cave drawing showed up, people were like, well, okay, cool. Now, how could we show this in a sequence that would show the history of it? Okay, cool. How could we give the illusion of this being something in motion? Okay, cool. And they added on to it. That's kind of that process we're going to follow through this class. So how it's generated is a few different ways. And this is going to go almost in chronological order. So the first one, well, is not there. It would be literally drawing each frame by hand. Then from there, they got into keyframing, which is you specify key frames, and then either artists as a team draw all the frames in between, or computers picked up the idea of how to interpolate the footage from frame to frame and make something appear like it was moving. Then we got into data driven. So anytime you see a movie like The Avengers or almost any modern sci-fi or action movie, you're watching something data driven. So people put on motion capture suits, the suits with the little sensors all over them. And as they move, we're kind of watching them. And the data is collected, and then that data is added to either a model or animation is added on top of it. But that's how they get a lot of things to move. Then there are procedural animations. And so these are things that follow rules. So you say this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And it's programming. So a lot of it is like, okay, so if a foot goes up this way, it's got to land this way. If it goes up this way, it's got to land this way. It's a procedural. There's rules that are set up. We're going to learn some principles of animation, but that's part of it. And then if it's done in the computer realm, it's literally like, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3. It's a procedure. So to make something bounce, you do step 1, step 2, step 3. And that ties into, again, in the CG world, the idea of simulation, and that's where it's animation that is based on laws of physics. So things like water, wind, air, clouds, all of that kind of stuff. That's that kind of animation. And we're going to touch on all of it because all of it had to kind of grow little by little organically over time. And especially looking at a worldview of it, it grew globally. So this is what it started out as. Good old Paleolithic Stone Age cave paintings. Animals depicted with multiple legs, and then they would draw over it a different drawing to make it seem like they were moving. So if you look, you can kind of see that these legs here, this thing didn't have 6 legs. This was meant to make it look or give that perception of movement or motion. And France, discovered in France. So then they took these and they created zoetropes. And we're going to get more into detail on all of this stuff each week as we progress. So next week, we're going to hit on cave drawings and zoetropes and all that stuff in really great detail. So the cylinder would spin. You'd look through the slits. It would look like it was moving. So a rapid succession of images gives you that illusion of motion. The first zoetrope was actually created in China around 180 Common Era. So that would have been 100. That's Common Era. I mean, we don't use BC so much anymore. Basically, it would have been 200 years prior to any sort of modern zoetropes being made or created. So from there, they made, and I'm going to screw this up every other time, the Phonatischope. So the phenakistoscope was a record, like a phonograph, right? That's where it gets its that fun name. And I love records, so I should really get better at saying it. But phonograph is so much easier. But it's a spinning disc, and you would attach it to a handle, and you'd spin it, and as it spun around, it would make things look like it moved if you looked at it through like a group of a slit. So basically, this would hang on the wall like a clock, and it would spin around, and as you look through the slit, it would make the people look like they were dancing. 1841 is when this really took hold and started to be kind of the cool thing to do at parties. So then we have the praxinoscope, which I can say no problem because this one makes sense to me. It improved upon that zoetrope and that idea of spinning something by and so as it would spin, it would beam out on a wall what you were seeing. So here's kind of what it would look like. 1877 in France, so a little over 140 years ago, they invented this. And so then he kept tweaking with it and playing with it. And Renaud is known as the father of kind of cinema for so many different ways or reasons. But from here, what we would do is we'd grab he'd put these out, and then you'd go to a parlor and you'd have a drink, and they would spin these things around. And this is what you would get to see, which was really cool. So you see it kind of all, the history of cinema and visual effects and animation all start off kind of similar to the same technology or the roots. So then we got flip books, right? So the idea of a flip book is you draw a bunch of sequences of images and you flip the pages around. So let me bring up an example. So each image flips, and as you flip it, it gets to appear like it's moving. So you can imagine creating an animated film, that's a lot of frames. So that's kind of a old school flip book, is they had photographs and they would place them all together, and then those photographs they would flip through them and it would make the image look like it was moving. Kinograph, moving picture. So then from here we start getting into the cinematograph. This allowed you to kind of run film through. This is what film projectors came from, right? So 1895 by the Lumieres, and this jumped it off. So I'm not going to hold into too much of this. So from there we got into movies, and it was like film studios. Charlie Chaplin had a film studio, silent films. Hollywood was born. And we get in this golden age of Hollywood. We're going to talk about where animation fit into this. But from like 1927 to 1963, Hollywood could do no wrong. So the main thing that animation had to do at this point was in stop motion animation. So let me bring up my animation example for this. And we're going to see more of this later. But imagine these are puppets now. And you move it one frame, take a picture, move it another, take a picture, move it another, take a picture. To an extraordinary world filled with magic. So this animation was the main type of animation being used in movies during the golden era. And how it was used for adding monsters and things like that, and then also used in TV for TV shows. Gumby was a huge one. Davy and Goliath was a big one. And we're really going to get into that when we go into this era in depth. So then, at the same time, movies needed something to happen before them. So this is where the cartoons kicked in. So the first cartoons were created to show before movies. The first animated full-length film was made in 1937. And then in the 50s, TV shows started coming up, and you got the Flintstones. So we're going to kick into all of these things and kind of go over them in great depth. And again, if any of these topics as we go over them week to week or in these first few weeks jump out at you, these are the things that I would implore you to maybe write your paper about or take a look at. These types of animations were made using cell animation. So cell animation is you draw on this clear acetate paper, and you have a background, you have a character cell and a character cell, and they all get stacked up on top of each other, and the camera takes a picture. And then the background maybe doesn't change, but then these character cells would be each of those frames of them. So then from there, we got into this idea of keyframes. So it'd be like, here's one keyframe, one keyframe, one keyframe, and these are all the frames you need to make something look like it was moving cohesively. And what would happen is, and again, we'll touch on this more when we get into Snow White, because artists were being hired because they're amazing and their cost would be extravagant. So cut down on budget, they'd have the famous artist draw all of these keyframes, and then anything that needed to happen in the middle, beginner artists would draw. And that's how it kind of got started in Snow White. All the way through, it was replaced with 2D computer animation in the 90s. So this is where I talk about that second golden era of Disney. We had the same animation techniques, think about this, from 1950 until 1990. 1990 kicks in, and in the 80s, there had been some computer animation. No, don't get me wrong, and we'll touch on that. But, like, it was, well, again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but arcade games and a few things, right? Movies were still very much the idea of cell animation. Boom. I think Beauty and the Beast was the first one, and it's the dance scene in the you know, a tale is all this time, and they're dancing around, and that whole background and that whole sequence was done 3D, 2D computer animation, which was amazing. And then Lion King and Aladdin just expanded on it, and it blew up. And while that was going on, America was getting inundated with video games. So the idea of computer-generated graphics was really starting to become comfortable to us. We had arcade games, then we had home arcade games, and those home arcade games switched to looking 3D. All of this was going on at the same time where our cinema was just about to blow up and change. So video games made us comfortable with it, so that then Pixar, and now we get to the Switch, which is amazing, Pixar could jump off, right? So if we didn't have Donkey Kong, we couldn't have had Toy Story. We couldn't have had Cars. We couldn't have had Finding Nemo. And my favorite, Up, because that's just how it worked, because we got comfortable with it. It's baby steps. We couldn't have gotten to rock and roll without jazz, without R&B. That's how media and all of it kind of works, right? And we're going to dive deep into all of this as we go through week to week. So each week we're going to really kind of do a deep dive into every one of these things I've touched on so far, at least these eras, is what I should say. So the difference with computer animation is we no longer needed those cells. 3D figures are made with a virtual skeleton. The limbs, the eyes, the mouth, the clothes, all of it are moved via keyframes, and position. And by the positions using those keyframes are done using the computer, either doing it manually, but for the most part, it's almost all done via computer now. If you use a computer and you say, okay, I want to start the keyframe here and have it end here, it'll make that leg move. It'll make that arm move. John Lasseter, now disgraced, but I still got to bring him up. He just hammered in the idea of these principles of animation and the things we need to focus on. So as we go through all of it, we're going to touch on these principles of animation. So each week we'll really focus in on how these impact our journey through these materials. So we have squash and stretch, timing, slow in, slow out, or ease in and ease out, anticipation, follow through, overlapping action, staging, exaggeration, and solid drawing and appeal. these are the things that all animators need to kind of focus on. So I want to give you a kind of working definition of what these mean and start with that. Squash and stretch. The idea of something having rigidness and mass and it distorting as it moves or bounces. So, for example, as a ball bounces, it would be this shape, hit, kind of squash, stretch out as it rings up, get back to its normal shape, and land. It's very important in facial animation. It's very important in physics and movement. So as we talk about Mushmouth, as we talk about animation growing and changing and moving as we go forward, we're going to touch on these principles. So we're going to touch on squash and stretch. The next one we'll touch on is timing. So how well does the actions space out to define the character and the personality objects? How something moves and the timing of its movements really can help define something as quote unquote real or not real. Ease in, ease out. Think of it as a car coming to a stop sign. So a car pulling up to a stop sign is going to ease into that stop. And then as it hits the gas, it's going to ease out of that stop and accelerate out. So your movements will have that same thing. It's the second and third order of continuity of motion, meaning something as it starts moving is going to start slow and pick up speed. Something as it stops moving is going to have to either stop abruptly by hitting a wall or having a physical reaction, or slow into that next motion and movement. Anticipation has preparation, action, and termination. So it's done with poses and music and the overall atmosphere of an animation. But anticipation plays a huge part in it because it helps build tension. And a lot of these carry over to film as well. So you see someone pull their hand back to get ready to punch. As an audience member, all of a sudden now you're wrapped and you want to know where that punch is going to land or how that punch is going to interact. That's anticipation. If you see the foot pick up, where's that foot going to land? If you see the eye look over, where's the eye looking? That kind of stuff in animation is a huge deal. And especially as we get into anime, they're so great at, focusing in on an eye and then having a sound play and you know that something's coming, but you don't know, right? Then we have follow through and overlapping action. So follow through is the termination of an action. So somewhere something's supposed to stop, but overlapping means the next action is picking up. So imagine a stumble. I'm stepping, I'm falling, but then the next step is the overlapping action. Can you imagine an animation if there was like dead time, awkward pauses, things like that? It would be horrible. So what this is meant to do is to kind of keep that from happening. Staging. Presenting an idea so they absolutely have an idea of what's going on. So the example on the left, even if you were just to see the shadow, you know what you're seeing. But if you were to see the shadow of the other, you wouldn't have any idea. So I would say only one idea should occur at a time. It should start with left to right. And then if you look here, that's bad animation. Because if you're a dirty mind, that looks like a penis. And all the way through the rest of it, you wouldn't be able to. This equals bad. Just because it's not clear. You don't get a clear idea of what it is or what it's doing. That's something to very much avoid. On the other end of it, exaggerating something, making something so extreme is a huge part of animation. So we are definitely going to kind of fall into all these different principles of animation as we go through. And then as we wrap up, how the typography is getting brutalized here through this slideshow. We're going to talk about how computer graphics have stepped in and how computer graphic humans are so hard, even when they're done right, to pull off. So that's why we choose to make humanoids. Things that are just enough real to make us feel like, okay, I get this. But at the same time, we're a little forgiving of Elmer Fudd not being super specific because of the style. It's a humanoid. It's a human-like figure is what's meant by the word humanoid. So that is, we're going to focus on all of these things. And as this technology grows and changes, we're going to talk about, has our ability to create realistic humans gotten better? And what is the impact of that? Or is it still better to aim with humanoids? So the last thing I want to talk about is this idea of uncanny valley. And I don't know how many people might have ever heard of this before, but it's this idea of if you stay on the left side of the valley, so you don't shoot for real, you shoot for stylized. You make alterations to things to make things look less human. So if we look back on here, industrial robot, humanoid robot, here, it's this valley in between that makes things seem sort of unrealistic. So how they break it down is we often talk about, we animate using the uncanny valley, to kind of trick people again into feeling like what they're seeing is more real. Because if something seems fantastic but comes across realistic, we'll believe it. But if something is supposed to seem realistic and comes across fantastic, we're not going to believe it. Does that make sense? I'm going to pause this slideshow now for a second. Because that is the nuts and bolts of my presentation part. So I want to just make sure this all made sense. So this class, super deep survey of all of these different principles of animation, but on a timeline. So starting at 1900, and then going all the way through in terms of where we are now. So it's going to be fun. The class is set up each week, so when you get into next week's module, there's going to be a bunch of screenings. Please watch them at your leisure throughout the week. I will be focusing on some of them during the lectures, as well as some of them will be called out in the discussions. But there are not a lot of readings for this class, so at least watching over the screenings and getting familiar with them prior to us having our lecture will be super helpful. I wanted to pause here and throw it out to you for the last 15 minutes or so of the class if you had any questions or comments or concerns of any of the things I touched on tonight during the lecture. For those of you watching the recording, please feel free to email me or post in the problems and solutions thread, and I'll be glad to help out too, however I can. And I can't stress enough, I'm very excited for this class. I think it's going to be outstanding. Yeah, I feel like the Uncanny Valley, CL, if you think about it in terms of spaceships, right? If you're watching a show and it's a sci-fi show and you're like, oh man, look at that spaceship. It's because it's got realistic shading, it's got realistic movement, it's doing the things it's supposed to do. If you're watching a NASA documentary and it's a rocket launching and it's obviously CG, what you're going to notice is, hey, that's not moving how the real rocket moves. I've seen this footage. I know how it's supposed to go. So if you lean into the sci-fi realm of animation, often people are more forgiving. And the Uncanny Valley is that kind of awkward space in between. Animation is all about tricking people. if we're going to be brutally honest. It's all about tricking the eye to be like, oh, I saw that, when really you're not seeing it at all. All right, very cool, guys. I'm going to give you back a little of your time this evening. We kind of blew through this very quickly, but every Thursday, 8:30, we will be here. If you can't be here, please feel free to catch the live recordings, and I'll post them also via email. I'll email them all out, and I'll also update each homepage for the week after the recording session is ready for you to review. Have a great night. Have an even better first week, and I will catch you guys all in the threads.
You are currently the only person in this conference.